because of tonight's live coverage of the Winter Gala from the Royal Opera House. Here now on BBC Two, later than planned, tonight's Newsnight with Peter Snow.
The government presents its new package for the old, the sick and the needy. But can it be fair to them and at the same time attempt to slash social security spending? Good evening. The Social Security Secretary said the welfare state would be strengthened by the benefit changes he announced to the Commons today. But how far does his package satisfy two aims of government policy, which sometimes risk being in conflict with each other? Increasing care for those who need it, and cutting what the government regards as the crippling cost of Social Security. Peter Lilly is with us to justify his approach to Labour's Donald Dewar and the Liberal Democrats' Don Foster. And how are those on benefit reacting to the detailed plans for compensation for that extra tax on fuel? Also tonight, Albert Reynolds, the Irish Prime Minister, tells his Parliament that Friday's summit will now be just a working meeting. And then he goes on to say that he wants Mr Major's agreement to the principle of self-determination in both parts of Ireland. How do Michael Mates and the leading backbencher in the Irish Dáil react to that? We also heard today that after an approach from Dublin, President Clinton had been on the phone to Mr Major. We'll be looking at the pressure from the Irish-American lobby for the Clinton administration to be far more interventionist, should the talks falter. Peter Lilly presides over a budget that consumes no less than 1/3 of all government spending, Social Security. Less than a fortnight ago, he set the cat among the pigeons by talking of what he called a future welfare society, in which there'd be an increasing share of provision by individuals, families and companies, rather than by the state. Today, Mr Lilly outlined to the Commons some of the first fruits of the review he's been conducting into Social Security when he fleshed out the measures the Chancellor headlined in yesterday's budget. Far from declaring war on the welfare state, Mr Lilly boasted that his budget was going up.
This is the largest increase of any department and demonstrates our commitment to the needy, the elderly, sick and disabled people.
A quite different emphasis, that, from the Chancellor's yesterday. He did declare war on the growth in Social Security spending.
Social Security spending is increasing at an underlying rate of more than 3% a year in real terms, well above the sustainable growth rate of the economy as a whole. If this trend continues, it will place a quite impossible burden on the working population in the future, our children and our children's children. If we don't plan the Social Security programme properly, we'll be unable to give effective help to those who need it most.
But Mr Clarke's spending plans don't match his rhetoric. Social Security spending rises from £80 billion this year to 83 next, then 88.4 billion, and then 92.4 billion 3 years from now. That's a real drop of just over 1% next year, but beyond that, real increases, over and above inflation, of 2% a year.
We have the government saying that it's committed to getting Social Security spending down as a share of national income. There's not much evidence here. We're seeing Social Security going up. If they're really to cut Social Security, they need to come up with the sort of structural changes that they talk about but haven't yet actually defined.
It far exceeds what most people expected.
Well, today, Mr Lilly told the Commons how he was going, as he put it, to make the welfare state more modern and affordable. Sickness benefit, he said, needed fundamental reform. He said big companies would begin to take over the responsibility for sickness pay from the state.
That is correct.
He said he was to simplify the payment and management of unemployment benefit. A new job seekers allowance would replace it, and cover would be reduced from 12 to 6 months from April 1996.
Our suspicion, and I think many people will share them, is that the ringing cry, "It's time for reform," when it comes from the right honourable gentleman, can be roughly translated into "It's time for a cut." And the people who will suffer are those who are at risk and who are looking for work in the job market.
Invalidity benefit, said Mr Lilly, was now claimed by 3 times as many people as 15 years ago. There'd be a new, tougher medical test, and from April 1995, all newcomers to it would pay tax on it. And on pensions, Mr. Lilly confirmed the Chancellor's announcement yesterday that women and men would be treated equally with the same retirement age of 65 as from the year 2020. But all this won't put more than a dent in that huge budget of his.
Even though the nation has been
So if he does want to save money, what reform should Mr. Lilly be embarking on? There's no shortage of ideas among those who've been advising him in the past few weeks.
I don't think you will ever see a single reform of social security bill. I think it's far too complex and too large to be susceptible of such treatment. What I think you will see is the reform programme by programme, as Peter Lilly put it in the Commons. The systematic look at every single programme, trying to bring it in line with modern needs, trying to bring the whole thing under control.
Well, tomorrow, the Environment Secretary will follow up Mr. Lilly by breaking it to local authorities just how much cash they can count on from central government over the coming year. They already complain that they've had to hack back local services. And Mark Easton has been to the heart of the East Midlands to see how people there face up to the challenge of relying less on public provision and more on themselves.
If the people here will ever forgive me, Ilkeston is in many ways any town. Like so many places in Britain, it was based on heavy industry, in this case coal and steel. Today it relies on light industrial and service companies. They say it's a town of two halves, with posh bits and poor bits side by side. So, on the day after central government set out its budget, and the day before local government learns its spending limits, we've come here to ask the townsfolk of Ilkeston whether they think Britain is right to try and reduce the role of the state in the lives of ordinary people.
It was the Elderly's Luncheon Club day today at the Ilkeston Council for Voluntary Services, and the man hosting it all was probably the oldest there. At 87, Ernie Symes, MBE, describes himself as a phenomenon. He has devoted his life to voluntary work, setting up a scout troop between the wars, a highly successful youth club in 1942, and one of the first ever disabled clubs in 1957. He believes that Britain needs to support and expand its voluntary sector. There is, he says, no shortage of people wanting to do their bit. Bang next door to the volunteers' headquarters is the local HQ for the state social service provision in Ilkeston. Among other things, this is where people come for advice on what benefits they can claim. As a welfare rights officer, Bokshaw Johal sees her duty as ensuring that people don't miss out on their entitlements. Far from reducing the role of the state in providing welfare, she believes it should spend more money. As finance director, Carl Francis is in charge of the money for one of Ilkeston's largest employers. 1,200 people work at Charnos plc, making underwear and knitwear. Mr. Francis, an American, came to Britain 5 years ago, since when he's come to believe that the UK still puts too much emphasis on state rather than individual responsibility. As far as the responsibility of local government is concerned, Ilkeston has already witnessed a big reduction. In the last 2 years, Derbyshire County Council's chief executive, Paul Raine, has had to cut £50 million from council spending. This year, 1,000 council employees were made redundant. As for next, well, tomorrow Mr. Raine will open a sealed envelope to find out how deep the cuts will be.
Well, the four people you've just seen are with me, all together here in the Mayor's Parlour at Ilkeston Town Hall. John Raine, if I could start with you. Tomorrow you find out just how much money Derbyshire County Council are going to have to spend next year. We suspect a cut of about 2%. Is that kind of reduction significant, do you think, in the wider debate about how much influence the state or local government has in the lives of the people it serves?
Yes, most certainly. When you talk about a 2% cut, we don't know yet. We'll know tomorrow evening. But whatever that cut is that's required of us, you have to consider that that comes on top of successive years of cuts. And so a further reduction tomorrow, whatever the size of that reduction, is going to be extremely painful, extremely difficult to achieve.
Do you think then that the voluntary sector is going to have to pick up more of the kind of services that you're no longer going to be able to provide?
I think there's going to be a greater weight of work and burden put on the voluntary sector. But services are a partnership between the local authority and between the voluntary sector. But bear in mind that over the last 2 years, the County Council, because of grant cuts, has had to significantly reduce the amount of support it can give to the voluntary sector.
Ernie Symes, we saw you in the film. You've devoted a life to this voluntary sector work. Is that right? I mean, are you struggling to keep things going because of cuts from local authorities?
We have been most fortunate and not been subjected to cuts by the local authority, because I believe they understand that the voluntary sector in Ilkeston is doing a really good job of work.
Well, you were telling me you've got volunteers coming out of your ears,
that
queuing up to do
it. But the big problem of the volunteers that we have are the aging population. And we checked on 7 luncheon clubs in the town a few weeks ago, and out of those, the volunteers that are manning the kitchens and the cooking and the washing up are on an average age of 72 years. Some of them over 80, and the youngest 65.
So the young volunteers aren't there?
The young volunteers aren't around. They're not being trained by some reason or other, and government are very fond of saying in their pamphlets and issues and in their speeches that there must be more reliance placed on the voluntary sector, which is a very important contribution to the statutory authorities, but there it ends.
All right, Boxall Johal, you see it from the other end, I suppose. Do you think that perhaps people are too dependent on the welfare state, and that we should perhaps be looking much more for a self-help society with a strong voluntary sector?
I think people have become... we need to keep the welfare state, we need to maintain the welfare state to help those people who do become unemployed through no fault of their own, those people who are vulnerable, the sick or disabled. Yes, they are dependent on the welfare state, and that welfare state needs to be maintained, benefits need to be increased to help those people who are actually in need. We have over...
Benefits should be increased, do you think?
Yes, benefits should be increased, not decreased, not less benefits. Many people are turning to voluntary sector groups like furniture projects for furniture. Unfortunately, a lot of these projects are grant maintained, have not enough money, can't cope with the demand. The voluntary sector will not be able to cope with the demands of the unemployed, of the sick and disabled.
Carl Francis, coming on to you. You are clearly an American. You came here 5 years ago, and I believe you were quite surprised at the level of welfare, the welfare culture that we have in this country.
There is a greater dependence on the state here than many other parts of the world. Any enlightened society, of course, takes care of those less fortunate members, but there is a price to pay. There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Should the state take more of a backseat, do you think, in this country, from your perspective?
Yes, I think so. I think really the answer is, I mean, of course, no one would argue against taking care of people that really need it. At the same time, I think the focus should be on industry, on job creation, on investment. I mean, we at Charnos have been very successful over the past few years by investing heavily in quality and high technology, and as a result, we've created jobs,
so
which
take money
takes
away
the
from
pressure
welfare
off of some of the state organizations.
So we should spend less on welfare and more on business, on industry.
I would propose more encouragement to the private sector to invest more, to create jobs, to be competitive in world markets, and then it becomes circular.
John Raine, do you think that's right, that the state should perhaps pull back a bit from the kind of services it provides at the moment?
I think Carl's view is a rather narrow one, because we're not just talking about handouts to people who have fallen through the net. We're talking about the totality of local government spending to provide a good, balanced level of provision within the county of Derbyshire.
John Raine, all of you, thank you very much indeed. And with that, back to London.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I'm joined here in the studio by Donald Dewar, who's the shadow Social Security spokesman for the Labour Party, by Don Foster, Liberal Democrat MP, who's deputising for their Social Security spokesman, who's on sick leave at the moment, and Peter Lilly, who's the Social Security Secretary. Mr. Lilly, is Derbyshire's Chief Executive right to fear that services will have to suffer in local authorities?
I can't remember a year when chief executives of local authorities have not claimed, A, that they were cut the previous year, B, they're about to be cut the next year, and C, nonetheless,
well,
increased
right
expenditure.
Or wrong. Has it been cut?
Well, as you know, total expenditure has increased after years and years of cuts. How are these things achieved? It's largely because of the language used often in the public sector. A cut means less of an increase than one would like. I can't speak about what will be in tomorrow's settlement. We'll have to wait and see.
But you take the point that he and the others are making there, that because of the constant pressure on costs in these local authorities, they're being driven more and more to rely on the voluntary sector, which simply can't can't manage it.
Well, that didn't come over in the discussion at all, did it? The voluntary sector said they got volunteers coming out of the areas and they hadn't been cut. That may not have fitted in with the thesis the programme wanted to show, but that's what actually came over on that clip of film.
No, with respect, you heard one of the people there saying that the voluntary sector couldn't be expected to cope with the demand put on it.
Well,
you're right.
With additional demands that it was suggested might be put on it.
Exactly.
But the actual volunteers were there plentiful.
True, he said he had plenty of volunteers available, yes.
Well, I don't propose that Social Security should suddenly become a voluntary matter. Obviously, that would be absurd. We have an obligation to help the sick, the disabled, those who need our help. We've got to try and meet that. But the only way we can do that is by being prepared to reform the system. If the money seems to be seeping out sideways and not reaching the people for whom it was intended, that's what I've been announcing today, reforms that concentrate help on the areas that Parliament really wanted the money to go and the sort of people that we want to help.
Donald, are you simply arguing that more money should be spent on social security?
No, I think that while unemployment continues at its present unacceptable levels and where we have a very low growth rate, then I think Peter Lilly's budget will continue to be in trouble. That's, I think, inescapable. But my concern is about the future. And I don't like the idea of a divided society with the welfare state simply as a safety net fallback provision, carrying stigma, the suggestion that if you can't look after yourself in some sort of a way, then you become a burden upon the state. I don't think that's the way in which we should approach these matters. I believe very, very strongly in individual responsibility. That's the first priority. But I think the state has to create the circumstances which allows individual responsibility to be exercised in many cases. And the danger is that we get so-called reforms like the new job seekers allowance, for example, which in effect is a way of taking a large number of people out of benefit. 12 months becomes 6 months. The entitlement is halved. And people who have spent a long, long time building up their contributions under the national insurance system suddenly find that they're struck at in this way, at the same time being asked, I may say, to pay for further national insurance taxes.
What possible case can you make for cutting that contributory right back from 12 months to 6 months?
We're joining together two benefits, income support and unemployment benefit, both of which were in conflict, had their separate systems, separate rules. Within that new coherent structure, there'll be an entitlement, contributory benefit for 6 months, but people after that will be able to receive help as long as they need it, as they can indeed at the moment through income support. But what we're really focusing on is getting people back to work sooner. Already 2/3 of those who become unemployed get back to work within 6 months. I would like to see that figure increase, and I hope that it will do.
Don Foster, how can you cut back on social security as the government is trying to do, and as even I'm sure your party would want to try and do something about that budget without causing pain somewhere?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, first of all, Peter Lilly, quite rightly, in fact, wants to simplify our benefit system, which is a hugely complex arrangement. The problem is behind his simplification, we are now seeing a large number of cuts. I mean, we've seen the cut in unemployment benefit announced today, we're seeing the cut in terms of support for disabled people, and we've seen a wholly inadequate level of support in terms of payments for the new VAT on fuel. But simplification is one thing, but the real way of making the saving is to look at the area of unemployment, a huge area of expenditure. And if we'd had a budget that was investing in the economy, that was investing in infrastructure, investing in education and training, and getting people back to work, that would have made the huge saving that Peter Lilly wants to see, and indeed I would like to see.
To suggest that the amount of money we've provided to help people meet VAT on fuel bills is inadequate, when it will amount to £1.25 billion a year.
But
how
Peter,
much should
your own
it
Social
how much should
Security
it,
Working
just ask, how much
Party,
should
your
it have
own
been?
Social Security Working Party said that it was inadequate by the tune of £300 million.
£1.25 billion? Were they asking for £1.5 billion? Is that what you think is necessary? We know that Donald thought that 50p would be enough for the pensioners, and we're giving substantially more than that.
I talked to Age Concern this evening, and Age Concern said that a single pensioner will have to pay another 86 pence a week and is only getting 50 pence to pay for it. Is that right?
You're talking their averages. In the first year, the single pensioner will get 50p, couple 70p, rising the next year to double that amount. In the final year, they'll get up to £2 for a couple. That's a very substantial sum.
Well, if you take Peter Lilly's own example from the budget papers, a married couple on income support with 2 children under 11 who are living on about £113 a week will get 45 pence towards the additional costs of VAT on fuel. But it's not just that issue. The other one is the incapacity benefit, rather unsympathetically named new benefit, which replaces invalidity benefit. Now, that is not a matter of trying to catch people who have been swinging the lead or who are getting a benefit to which they are not entitled. As I understand it, the new so-called objective test is redrawing the rules so that people who under the old system would have been entitled to benefit, quite legitimately, will no longer be entitled. That seems to me, again, to be a somewhat unsympathetic approach, particularly at a time when these people with long-term illness problems are very, very unlikely to find themselves successfully competing in the job market.
How many fewer people do you reckon you're going to get on an invalidity benefit as a result of your changes?
Well, it'll depend on the final rules and how they're established after our consultation, but a rough order of magnitude, something like 70,000 people a year who at present get the benefit would not do so if we had an objective test of whether they really are medically incapable of work or are fit to work. Now, if they're fit to work, they should be helped back into work.
I mean, one of the problems is that Peter Lilly is quoting figures, yet he set up some research to look into the reasons why this particular aspect of his budget was rising. That report is not due to be published until 1994, and he knows as well as I do that one of the reasons why the cost is going up is because it is people that are on it for a longer period of time.
Before I came here, I bumped into a businessman who said, I'm glad what you've done. My previous firm, when we made people redundant, the personnel manager actually advised them how they could get onto invalidity benefit. Even though they were not invalids, they'd been working perfectly happily, they were being made redundant. We all know this has been going on. For the two opposition spokesmen to pretend that this reality is not so, it seems to me very foolish.
All right,
we have to make sure this help goes to people who are genuinely unable to work.
You're reducing the amount of money available.
Well, let's just see what happens. But I predict now that there will be quite a very significant number of people who will have genuine health problems and who will find themselves in limbo and without the support.
All right, let's just finally come back to Andrew Dilnot's point. I don't know whether you remember him earlier saying, the director of the IFS, saying that you've got to embark on a much more radical restructuring of social security if you're really going to make any impact on your budget.
I want to approach it sector by sector, making sure that we have a rational system in each area which achieves the objectives Parliament set, to give help to the people we want to help and make sure that it isn't dissipated going to those who weren't intended to get it or who are, in some cases, even defrauding the system.
But you're going to have to do much more than just what he's regarding as tinkering around the
changes
to do that.
We've made are very substantial, and there wouldn't be the resistance from the opposition spokesman if that weren't the case. He may have even greater ambitions. I don't think many people would have imagined we'd be able to achieve such a consensus as we have for the sort of changes we've already made.
It's the long-term objectives that worry me. I've been listening to what Peter Lilly has said, what Michael Patillo has said. They talk about contracting out, withdrawing from whole areas of provision. That's what worries me. I'll argue about individual reforms. The ones that we've seen so far are thoroughly unpleasant, but the shape that is emerging is one that really does amount to what the Prime Minister said he would never do.
Thank you.
That is dismantle the welfare state.
Thank you, Donald Dewar. Thank you, Don Foster. Thank you, Peter Lilly. Now, it's emerged tonight that the Irish Prime Minister is asking John Major to join him in acknowledging that the Irish people have the right to self-determination. Although this would recognise, apparently, that the people of the North had the right to determine their future separately, it seems that this may be the main obstacle to a conclusive meeting between the two men on Friday. That was what they were planning. That session has now been downgraded from what was to have been a summit to the first of what the Irish Prime Minister called a series of working meetings. Peter Marshall reports.
A measure of the newly regained Anglo-Irish discord was apparent in the Irish Parliament at Dáil. While the British may be anticipating a summit on Friday, in Irish eyes the Reynolds-Major talks will be nothing quite so grand. Mr Reynolds himself avoided using the word summit and instead looked forward to the first of a series of meetings.
It is our intention to hold a series of meetings during the month of December. The first of these, a working meeting, will be held in Dublin on Friday.
The fear in Dublin, expressed in the Dáil yesterday, is that they've been duped, left out in the cold, while the British have been having secret contacts with the IRA.
Could I ask the Taoiseach if he would agree that the main activity now, as far as the peace process is concerned, seems to be between the British government and the Provisional IRA, and to a large extent the Irish government are being sidelined in this process?
I do not regard the Irish government's position as being sidelined. As I said already, it is not for me to comment on what actions the British government take in having discussions or communications or otherwise with either Sinn Féin or the Provisional IRA. It is a matter for themselves.
While John Major was meeting the Belgian Prime Minister today, Downing Street issued a statement saying that Mr Major and Mr Reynolds had kept in close touch over the past 6 weeks, and Friday's summit would be the first of a series of meetings. A follow-up coming next week when the two meet at the European Council in Brussels. Whatever the interpretation, Anglo-Irish diplomacy is stripped bare once you know the real nature of the dispute. It revolves around the communiqué that's to be issued after Friday's talks or summit. Mr Reynolds said tonight that he wanted it to include a declaration of the Irish people's right, north and south, to self-determination. That's believed to be the key part of Dublin's undisclosed peace plan, and London isn't having it.
It's been reported that one element you seek is, in the declaration, is the right to national self-determination based on consent freely given north and south.
That's true.
While Dublin won't get that, not at the moment at any rate, the position is still developing.
Well, there's been quite a change of mood in Dublin for all of this week, with the disclosures that the British government was negotiating and talking with Sinn Féin and the IRA for most of this year. There was a great feeling of betrayal and anger at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, and that betrayal and anger, we're told, was conveyed to the British government. It was on that basis that the Taoiseach, Mr Reynolds, dismissed the idea of having a summit meeting on Friday for the last 2 days, when the suggestion came from the British government that the meeting on Friday could be followed by 2 further meetings to discuss a peace initiative. Dublin was quite happy to accept it. It now feels that it has got Mr Major's attention for this initiative and that there is everything to play for.
In Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist leader Ian Paisley was predictably scathing about the new round of talks. He said John Major is very weak and he's ready to make a surrender to Dublin. And in a separate development, the IRA issued a statement claiming the British had offered them full negotiations 8 months ago in exchange for a 2-week ceasefire. The statement, denied by the British, says the British government made a definitive proposal for full-blown delegate meetings between their representatives and Sinn Féin. The British government suggested Scotland or one of 2 Scandinavian countries as possible venues. There's one other development, this time involving the Americans. Following the Irish Foreign Minister Dick Spring's visit to Washington last month, President Clinton contacted John Major and spoke of peace in Northern Ireland. While Dublin sources say he asked John Major to go the extra mile for peace, in Downing Street they note that he promised to be cheering any talks from the sidelines. Both Dublin and London agree on one point, that the Americans are mutual allies.
Well, that was Peter Marshall reporting, and I'm joined now by Michael Mates here in London, the former Northern Ireland Security Minister, and by Dermot Ahern, Fianna Fáil MP and Joint Chairman of the British-Irish Parliamentary Group. Mr Ahern, could you help us first? Why does Mr Reynolds apparently want to make so much of this commitment to self-determination in Ireland?
Because ultimately whatever settlement is to be agreed in relation to the island would have to be by a joint referenda on both sides of the border.
But it would be separate referenda on both sides. So in other words, there would be a majority veto, as it were, on any self-determination in the north.
That's correct, yes. But I mean, what we're saying to the unionist community or to the majority in the north is that before it gets to a situation where perhaps a 50% plus one majority ultimately vote in favour of a united Ireland from within the north, that we should try and decide our own destiny between that and this. We are in a potential dangerous situation where, according to some official figures, the likelihood is that in maybe 50 years' time there might be in fact a nationalist majority, or those people in favour of a united Ireland from within the north. Now that would be a dangerous way in which the unionists would in effect be forced into a united Ireland. So it would be far better if the 2 traditions on the island were to come together, and hopefully the summit, the meetings that are taking place between the Prime Ministers will adopt some form of words which will be acceptable to the vast majority of the 2 traditions on the island.
Right. Now, Mr Mates, why do you think it should be so difficult, if that's what the position is, for Mr Major to go along with something like this?
I think that this is doing a great deal to clear up the misunderstandings that have been around today. The Anglo-Irish Agreement quite clearly says that the Irish government acknowledges there can be no change in the constitution of Northern Ireland without the agreement of the majority. And now this is being repeated by Dermot Ahern, and he would repeat it because he's a very sane and sensible parliamentarian. But in between this, we have got to find a way forward, to find a new structure for government in Northern Ireland which reflects the wish of the majority. Dermot says that in 50 years' time there could be a majority of those of the nationalist tradition on the island. That doesn't necessarily mean there would be a majority in favour of changing the constitution, because the last time we had a border poll, it's quite clear a number of members of the nationalist Catholic community did vote to remain within the United Kingdom. So it's a very fluid situation. And while we've had a difficult weekend, when tempers get frayed, both leaders, both Albert Reynolds and John Major, are above that sort of irritation. They know the prize is so great that they must proceed through these irritating things that will happen from time to time.
Sure, but can you address the point? Can you address the point? But the point is that Mr. Major would appear to be, would he not, worried about accepting the idea of a commitment to self-determination in the North and South of Ireland.
I don't think he is worried in any way about the Irish people having their say about any way forward, which is going to include, by their own definition now, an amendment to the articles of their constitution and a referendum being put to the people of Northern Ireland over any consequential result that we could get as part of this peace process of a new way forward for democratic government within Northern Ireland,
but you're not quite
recognising the wish of the majority.
You're not quite saying the same as Mr. Ahern.
Yes, I think I am.
Well, do you think he is, Mr. Ahern?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Well, do you think the way Mr. Mates has formulated that would be an acceptable way of formulating it for the Irish government too?
Well, ultimately, as I said before, it would have to be by joint referenda. I think that's the way forward.
Joint referenda once you've got a settlement?
That's right. It would be up to the two governments to propose something which hopefully they would get the indication prior to them putting it up that it would have the vast support of the people on the island.
All right, well, if there's nothing between you on that, can you just be clear then, what do you believe the problem is between Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Major that's sort of making this summit downgraded and turning into a working meeting?
Ultimately, I think the British have a problem with this idea of self-determination. And there also is the situation whereby we tend to believe here, because of the so-called understanding with the Unionist Party, that they are not neutral and that they are not facilitators in relation to a coming together of the two traditions on the island.
Mr. Mates, do you think self-determination is the way it's apparently being pressed by the Irish government?
But this is the fundamental basis of democracy. And what Dermot Ahern is saying is that if we can reach settlement, if we can get peace, if we can find a structure that is satisfactory to both the Unionists and the Nationalists and London and Dublin, this must be put to a referendum in the North and South. And the referendum in the North will address the new constitutional arrangements which keep Northern Ireland for as long as the majority want within the United Kingdom. And that in Dublin will have to address those structures that will be between North and South and London and Dublin, and the changes to their constitution.
So there should be no problem then, Mr. Major. What do you think is holding it up? What do you think is downgrading this summit on Friday?
The fact that there's so much more work to be done, and the fact that the making public of the exchanges which have taken place between the government and the IRA has set things back for a moment, but in fact, I think when all the froth has gone, will have given us a greater chance to achieve peace, because it's going to be very difficult for the IRA to start their violence again.
Mr. Bates, Mr. Ahern, thank you very much indeed. Well, the government tonight admitted there were some transcription and typing errors in the messages it released to and from the IRA. But Sir Patrick Mayhew made it clear this did not alter the substance of the communications. President Clinton's phone call to the Prime Minister, John Major, is a reminder of the powerful Irish lobby in the United States. He courted the Irish-American vote during the presidential elections, but more recently he incurred their wrath by refusing to give Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams a visa. Gordon Brewer has been looking at the importance of the Irish lobby and its impact on the Clinton administration.
At a gathering on Long Island in New York, supporters of NORAID, the Irish-American fundraising group which the British government says collects money for the IRA, are celebrating the uncertain moves towards peace in the old country. They're delighted that Sinn Féin, the IRA's political wing, is edging closer to involvement in a peace process. But there's anger here too. The American administration has just refused a visa for Gerry Adams, Sinn Féin's leader, despite a campaign pledge by President Clinton to let him in to present his views to the American public.
I don't think much of Bill Clinton. He wouldn't fight for his own country, and I don't think he wants to help Ireland fight for their country.
As far as I can see, he's a bit of a liar. He promised the Irish a lot of things, and he's failed them in other ways.
Martin Galvin, Norreid's leader, is determined to make Clinton change his mind.
We're going to continue to show him that these are not issues that will go away. They're not issues that will be forgotten. They're not issues that we will accept a breaking of his pledges, that we intend to see that he keeps that pledge, and specifically that he gives a visa to Gerry Adams.
In Washington, too, the Clinton administration is under increasing pressure to seize the initiative on Ireland. Whether he likes it or not, President Clinton is a player in the conflict in Northern Ireland. Irish Americans turned out in force to back his campaign for the presidency, and the reason they voted for him was that he seemed to promise a change in direction in the administration's policy on Ireland. Only a year later, many of those same Irish Americans feel disillusioned and betrayed.
From all that I see, Ireland may well be at a crossroads. There now exists a real opportunity for peace.
At a special debate in Congress, members from Irish American constituencies are trying to counter what they see as the administration's backpedaling on Ireland. They're staging an after-hours debate which reaches millions of Americans through the C-SPAN cable television network. Congressmen from both parties are united on the symbolic importance of winning a visa for Gerry Adams.
If Yasser Arafat can stand on the South Lawn of the White House, then certainly Gerry Adams should be allowed to come into this country and explain his position.
But the rhetoric here is aimed as much at the voters as at the president. Bill Clinton has, typically, been keeping his options open in his dealings with these congressmen. At the same time as he was taking a tough line on Sinn Féin, he arranged for them to meet here at offices of the National Security Council. At that meeting, Tony Lake, the president's national security advisor, gave them a strong message that Ireland was moving to the forefront of the administration's attention. The hopes of Irish Americans centre on another pledge Mr. Clinton made before he was elected, to send a peace envoy to Northern Ireland to help bring the two sides together. The idea was received in London with a distinct lack of enthusiasm and seemed to have been quietly shelved. Now, since the meeting with the Irish American congressman, it's reappeared on the agenda.
The value of a U.S. representative would be within the context of talks to provide additional ideas, an additional forum for the expression of ideas. One of the elements that the President highlighted in his remarks in March was that our policy would be in full consultation with both Dublin and London. And so if a development were like this to occur, I think that it would be following those very close consultations.
Consultation is not necessarily the same as agreement.
No, that's right.
It's that crucial issue of whether America could take an initiative without British agreement which risks upsetting relations between Washington and London. Bruce Morrison, an old friend of Bill Clinton, organised the Irish-American campaign to get him elected. He believes there should be no British veto on an American envoy.
I think if the Irish government were to say at a future time that now was the time that that intervention would be helpful, and I say intervention in the, not in the sense of imposing anything, but as a part of facilitating the process that they're pursuing, I think there would be a positive response in the White House.
Even if there wasn't a positive response from London?
Yeah, I think that I would hope London would understand that this was a commitment the President made and that their job as friends of the United States would be to respond in a way of saying in what way will the peace envoy be useful, not no, we're going to not cooperate. And in fact, I think the British government couldn't refuse to cooperate to an American initiative if it came.
Joe Kennedy, the former president's nephew, believes an envoy should be sent if the current talks fail. Last week, on the 30th anniversary of John Kennedy's assassination, he and other members of the Kennedy family paid their respects at Arlington Cemetery. But Joe has taken a much more radical stance on Ireland than either the former president or Senator Edward Kennedy.
The fundamental issue with regard to Ireland
is whether or not we're going to finally get peace in the North. Now, if in fact the talks that are taking place between the SDLP and the North, and as well as the Republic and the British, along with Sinn Féin, can demonstrate a solution, then these squabbles that take place in terms of domestic politics in the United States are really going to fall very quickly into the background. If, on the other hand, for some reason the talks should fall apart, then I think the Irish-American community will expect a much more vigorous response by the Clinton administration to kind of goose the talks along and make certain that, that there are serious efforts made by the British to come to grips with a solution to Northern Ireland.
At Mineola on Long Island, Irish-American children from schools across New York State have gathered for a step dancing competition. Their parents are ordinary, middle-class Americans who want little to do with Sinn Féin or the IRA. But they are concerned, and they're not impressed by the administration's talk about sending an envoy. They want action, and they want their congressman to get it for them now.
Well, Clinton's getting involved in every other struggle in the rest of the world. Why shouldn't he get in there and get England moved out of Ireland?
You always get a lot of election promises that they never keep after they are elected. However, I think that there will be enough Irish-American pressure put on him that he will have to put a representative in Northern Ireland.
Tom Manton, one of the congressmen who has been lobbying on the Irish issue, is already feeling the heat from the voters. Only a year into the Clinton presidency, he's warning the president to keep an eye on the next election.
We have given them a break for 1 year, and there are many millions of Irish-American voters in this country. I think the president, you know, the 4 years will go up pretty quick. We like to think that we were helpful in the election of the presidency, and a lot of our enthusiasm was based on promises about Northern Ireland and other, obviously, lots of other issues. So the 4 years rolls around pretty quick. So I would suggest that the president ought to look at the promises that he's made and give some early attention to them.
If he acts affirmatively and effectively in the months to come, then we will have gotten the president that we asked for with respect to these issues. If this issue never really makes it as something that gets the support and attention and initiative that it deserves and that the envoy represents, then I certainly couldn't argue to those concerned about Northern Ireland that they've gotten what they voted for.
The administration in Washington has so far steered a middle course between its friendship with Britain and its Irish-American constituents. A breakdown of the peace process could force President Clinton to choose between them.
Gordon Brewer in Washington. And finally, a brief look at some of today's other news. The Defence Secretary, Malcolm Rifkind, has announced a reorganisation of defence spending following a £1.3 billion cut at his budget. Mr Rifkin's plan, Frontline First, would shift resources from support staff to frontline forces and employ an extra 3,000 troops and buy new equipment. The receivers have been called in by the defence electronics group Ferranti, putting 3,600 jobs at risk. The move comes after GEC withdrew a rescue bid, saying they had found problems in the accounts. Princess of Wales met various popular entertainers at a concert in Wembley Arena tonight, held as part of World AIDS Day. The day has been marked by demonstrations, rallies and vigils, and governments are being urged to do more to find a cure. Quick look at the markets. In London, continued confidence in the budget added £10 billion to the value of British companies. The 100-share index closed at an all-time high, up 66 points, 32.33. In New York, the Dow Jones closed up 13 points at 36.97. A couple of quick headlines in tomorrow morning's papers. The Times has Kenneth Clarke rejecting the Tory right's agenda for large-scale reforms of the welfare state, and today has the news that Anne Kirkbride, Coronation Street's Deirdre, is battling against cancer. That's all from Newsnight tonight. Next news, Business Breakfast, 6 tomorrow morning. Breakfast news an hour later. We're back tomorrow night at 10:30. Till then, good night.